And so reality out there is not there to please you, and we have a very hard time because of our solipsistic nature. We think that the world revolves around us. So whenever something goes wrong, you're like, well, why did it go wrong? Hey guys, so I'm back and it's the end of the day here in San Marcos in Guatemala, and as you can see, the sun is probably set. You can't really tell, it's a little bit cloudy back there, but the lake is beautiful as usual, and you can see some fishermen back there doing their thing, and I'm here in a tiny little dock that's part of the Pyramides Hotel. And this morning I did this topic about time as described by Eckhart Tolle, and I talked a little bit about how your mind keeps dragging you into the past and the future, and what the drawbacks of being dragged by your mind like that are. And that's what creates the egoic mind that I've been talking about. But what I thought I'd do just to close the day off was to go into a little bit more into detail on the mechanics, right? So to really dissect how it is that your mind just pulls you away from the now, and how you go into this dreamlike state in which you're daydreaming or just completely lost in thought, and you've lost presence and you've lost the now, and you're essentially on autopilot at that point. And sometimes it can be just this sort of very mild, daydreamy, distracted type of thing. But in its worst form, you're being super anxious about things, or you are, feeling a lot of regret, or you're just unhappy. And whenever you feel unhappiness or tension in your body or in your mind and your emotions, it has to do with the fact that you are creating either past or you're creating future in your mind. And we discussed about how to come back into the now, using, say, awareness of the body and things of that kind. But in this video I thought, well, why don't we just look at scenarios in which this identification happens. And what I thought I'd do is I divide these scenarios in things that can happen outside of you that bring out the unconsciousness in you, and that make you become identified with the ideas in your mind or the emotions, or things that can happen internally that can take you in that same direction, okay? They're both equally pervasive and equally pernicious, if you will. And so you want to work against both, and you want to sort of, start to create enough presence in your mind so that you notice when this mode of thinking, this mode of mind operation kicks in. All right, so that's kind of the objective of this video. And by the way, I just caught myself saying that you want to work against this. Well, that's another trap, isn't it? You don't want to make the ego mind an enemy, because that's what the ego mind loves. It loves enemies, and if you make it an enemy, it just comes through the back door. So what you want to do is you just want to observe, right? That's the big principle here. But so talking about the exact mechanism. So usually what happens is you're going to be triggered from the outside. And outside triggers are going to bring a reaction out in you, okay? So Eckhart talks about, let's say, a car alarm going off on the street while you're trying to take a nap, for example. I could think about 1,000 examples. I was just trying to start this video elsewhere, away from the water. And because it's a little bit closer to the end of the afternoon, I sat in a garden, and I immediately started to be eaten away by mosquitoes, and I had to almost make a run for it. And so there's an outside trigger, okay, and it brought out irritation in me. Now it wasn't a huge amount of irritation, but then again, it was not a big event. Now, if you think about it, though, it doesn't take that much to create a lot of irritation in your life. Sometimes something as little as say a long queue in the supermarket is going to make you incredibly annoyed if you're pressed for time, for example. I've had times where I'm going into the supermarket, and right in front of me there'll be this old lady who probably lives with another, I don't know, 5 old ladies, each of whom want to pay in cash with separate checks, okay, separate bills at the supermarket. And so it takes like half an hour for the lady to check out from the supermarket. And you know, she doesn't do that during working hours. She does that right when I'm there trying to buy my little, you know, single meal, right? And so all those are thoughts that are going through my head about, hey, why couldn't she do it while the supermarket is totally empty? You know, she's probably retired with nothing better to do. And I see myself starting to hate on her because I see her as this obstacle. She's stopped being a person and she's started to become an obstacle that is standing between what I want and myself, okay? So now she's an enemy. And so that's just like one tiny example, but what I wanted to illustrate there is how the problem at hand doesn't even need to be that big for you to go full into identification with your mind, into egoic thinking. And so now that's what you're trying to prevent in yourself, that inner resistance and that inner going into identification with mind, and that going into essentially fighting reality, and you know, that inner hatred that starts to swell inside of you. Okay, now let's observe for a moment the mechanics of it, because this is really important. And I think that in listening to the mechanics and just being aware that this is happening, you would already be, let's say, more prepared to tackle it, right? It might be that you still get dragged along when the situation is bad enough or annoying enough, depending on your own mind. Different situations annoy different people, and you'll still get dragged along. But once you've become aware of the mechanism, you've taken the first step at coping better, let's say. So this is the usual thing that happens. So you're going about your business, and something happens on the outside, which is, for example, you're driving on the road and somebody cuts you off, okay? And well, so that's the event, all right? So that's, you could call that reality just you know, threw something at you, and now you're annoyed. Okay, so that first nuisance, that first gut reaction from you is almost inevitable. I mean, unless you become some kind of enlightened master who is super detached from reality, you know, you're gonna have that gut reaction swell up, and you're gonna feel it. And your first gut instinct is going to be probably to, you know, throw an insult at this person, and then you're going to start creating stories in your head about how this person shouldn't have done that. You're going to make assumptions about the type of person that they are. You know, you're going to assume that they're arrogant. You're going to assume that they're careless. Maybe you're going to go like, oh, what, you know, such an asshole, right? I'm just here minding my own business, and why did you have to cut me off that way? You know, that makes you a certain kind of person, and you are the other now. You are the enemy. And what you're going to notice is that you start to make all these stories and assumptions about this person who you don't even know. And, you know, you're going to look at their car, and then you're going to use that against them as well. And you're going to use anything, right? So if it's a fancy car, you're going to go like, well, that explains it, right? You're just some kind of rich asshole who thinks that you own the road, and therefore you cut me off. Well, let me tell you, mister, you know, that doesn't give you the right, blah, blah, blah. And if it's a really shitty car, you know, it's going to be like, well, that explains it. You know, you don't even do that well for yourself. That means that, like, you don't have your act together, and it's because you don't care about people. You know, you go around cutting them off, and that's what makes you, like, you know, your life is not what it should be. And say that they had the exact same car that you do. Well, then you would go into the mode of like, well, you know, it just comes to show that not all Volvo drivers are the same, right? Because here we are having the same car, but you and I are nothing alike, because, you know, I would never cut people off like that. So, you know, on and off the stories go, and you're gonna just, you're gonna, you know, you're gonna find any kind of reason to, in a sense, underpin the nuisance and the irritation that you're feeling within. And your head is gonna go into story creating mode to keep that feeling alive and to justify the fact that you felt annoyed. Now, so this is a minor infraction, and it could be that it's not even that big a deal, right? So let's think about something a little bit more serious, right? So now suddenly you, let's say your mother tells you that she disapproves of your life, right? So let's say that she always wanted you to be a doctor, and you decided to instead become an artist, and you just had an argument with her, right? And in that argument, you found yourself becoming incredibly emotional and reactive towards what your mother was trying to say. So, your mother makes a comment, and it might have been even an innocuous comment, or it might have been an aggressive comment, and that triggers that reactivity within you. And maybe you've had these arguments before, and the two of you don't look eye to eye on the topic. But so she says the comment, and the reaction comes, and out comes your retaliation. And your retaliation is a kind of defense mechanism, because you're feeling attacked, and there's very little chance for a conversation anymore, because you're just on attack mode now. You feel like your ego is under attack, and it's almost like a pain point has been triggered in your psyche, and you're blind now. All possibility for creative thought, all possibility for having a sensible, constructive conversation has gone out the window. And it's almost like it's two ego minds speaking to one another, as opposed to two individuals trying to understand each other, trying to be loving, and trying to see where the other is coming from. And you could even agree to disagree with a lot of love inside of you. But instead of that, the pain point has been triggered, and the reaction comes out, okay? And so one of the reasons for this is because, in a sense, there is a filter between what's being said and the real you within. And that filter is kind of the egoic mind, and it surrounds you. So the input comes in, and it hits some kind of memory, and it hits some kind of idea of the world that you have, or some kind of past experience that was painful. And the reaction comes out immediately. So there's no real control, and in fact there's no real choice. You had no choice but to retaliate, because you don't have the space between the input and the output that you give back. It's just like it's like a little ball bouncing off of you, or it's like you're a mirror and a little ray of light comes, and you just bounce it right back, and it's completely mindless, right? So a lot of these arguments and a lot of these reactions come not because you're an evil person, not because there's something wrong with you, but because you're an autopilot. I mean, you're not even conscious that you're doing this. You're not conscious of the mechanism. And so you are, as opposed to responding to things, you are just mindlessly reacting to things. And there's no space between to evaluate and sort of cool down, or try to even walk away from the conversation or from the situation. Okay, now so what you notice is that then the world is constantly throwing things at you, and unless you've been hiding under a rock, you'll notice that this world has not been created to satisfy your wants and needs. So stuff is going wrong all the time. There's queues at the supermarket all the time. Mothers disapprove all the time. Your food arrives cold in a restaurant while you're trying to impress your date, for example, or you'll book a trip, and it turns out that the photos of the hotel you booked, turned out to be completely inaccurate, and the place is under construction, and there's noise every night. I remember this really funny, when I started to acquire a little bit more presence, I found myself asking a very funny question that kind of illustrates the point. So I was essentially, I had just cooked dinner, and I ate dinner, and there was a lot of food left. So I thought, well, I'm gonna put some of the rest of it in this Ziploc bag, and I'm gonna store it in the fridge. All right. So I'm grabbing my dinner on one hand, and I have this Ziploc bag on the other, and I'm trying to kind of hold the bag and sort of open it in a fairly silly, clumsy way, because I'm trying to multitask, and the bag just won't open. And I found myself out loud asking the question, why does this bag, not realize what I'm trying to do, right? As in, why is it not cooperating? And I thought it was hilarious, because that voice there of can't this bag see what I'm trying to do, is the voice of the ego. Except that it's not always a Ziploc bag you're battling. Sometimes it can be a person, sometimes it can be just this situation that is not turning out the way you would like, right? But in essence, it is the same mind mechanism. It is, okay, reality is not behaving the way I want it to, therefore I object, right? I am annoyed and I hereby express my disapproval of reality in the way it is, right? And I'm gonna create violence, internal violence against myself, just to show, right? I'm gonna show righteous indignation against the fact that things aren't exactly the way I would like them to be. Okay, so that's the ego at work, right? That's the really the example of the mind mechanism of external circumstance happens. I disapprove because that's not the way I want reality to be, and therefore I am indignated and I start to create a lot of violence, and my inner ecosystem has now become entirely contaminated with, you know, crappy hormones that would make me unhappy, make me jittery, make me also unhealthy in the long run. So a lot of people live very constricted in this way. Others are learning to let go. It's a path of letting go, and others have let go completely, which is why we call them enlightened. Okay, so these are people who have entirely transcended that mind mechanism in which you are constantly objecting at the fact that reality is not turning out to be in the way you like. Now, here's what's interesting though. Sometimes you don't even need an external mechanism, and that's where we get into internal ways in which the ego mind just kicks in. Okay, and so it could be as simple as, hey, you know, maybe you are one of those hangry people, you know, and by hangry, you know, it's like when you get hungry, you get angry, right? Like your sugar is low, you haven't had a bite in a while, and you just start to notice that you're kind of moody, right? The way I noticed that, especially in Amsterdam, now there's another harmless mosquito cloud around me. In Amsterdam, I sometimes notice that I'm cycling around, and it'll be like, you know, oh man, you know, there's a guy coming next to me now, and if he cuts me off, you know, I'm gonna let him know because, you know, people are super rude in Amsterdam, and I'll go like, oh, I'm hungry, right? But I've developed that mindfulness now. It used to be the case I would have like 15-20 minute bike rides in which I would have mental battles with every single person I came across. I would go like, well, you know, if they cut me off, I'm gonna say, well, excuse me, sir, but you know, how dare you, right? And I was like, and when I started noticing this pattern, I started noticing all this negativity that I was constantly holding inside of myself. And the moment you notice it is the moment you start to cure yourself of it. And so you carry this more positive attitude, and it turns out that you're surrounded by super cool people that are super friendly, and that, you know, maybe you know, they can't wait to meet you, and then they can't wait to have an awesome little chat of whatever kind. But because I was carrying all this negative mindset, probably because I was hungry half the time, you know, I was living in that reality, right? So so hunger could be one of them. But sometimes, you know, so I've heard women have, like, you know, once a month, they tend to be much more emotional than they normally are. And so all it takes is a little circumstance, or sometimes there's nothing happening outside. There's just a lot of emotion welling up inside. Your hormones are playing tricks on you. And, you know, your brain is essentially, your brain is not living in isolation. Your brain is soaked in this hormonal soup that is just pulling you left, right, and center half the time. And just knowing that, and knowing that that you don't have to, let's say, be pulled by these emotions mindlessly is a big help. Now, the way you cut that, of course, is by not feeding them with thought. Okay, so once the emotion from within swells up for no reason, then you can notice it. But the mechanism is, normally emotion comes in from within, either because of hormones, you're hungry, or, you know, whatever other thing going on. Maybe it's just a rainy Sunday and you're getting the Sunday blues, and so it wells up from within, and then you go like, okay, well, there's an emotion, and your mind is kind of a reason-making machine, right? And so what your mind will naturally do is it will start to invent reasons of why your emotion is true. And there's a certain curious aspect of the mind and which is, they say that the mind, or that rather that memory is state dependent or emotion dependent. In other words, certain thoughts resonate with certain memories and certain emotions, and they all resonate together, which is why when you have a bad emotion that comes out of nowhere, you feed it with thoughts that justify it, and then that brings the emotion even higher, and you go in this downward spiral of more negative emotion, more negative thoughts, and down you go the rabbit hole, or rather down the rabbit hole you go. So so what you see is that you have these emotions that are coming up, and because you are not mindful, you're identified with them, and the mind creates these thoughts, and they resonate with one another. All right. Now, these emotions could come out of nowhere, but they could also come out of something triggering a memory within you, or you are simply being dragged by your mind. In the case of, say, the Sunday blues, you're getting the Sunday blues because you're dreading Monday coming, right? You're projecting yourself into the future, and so that projection into the future, that egoic projection, is then creating these feelings of dread, because the week full of responsibilities is coming. And so you, instead of just being mindful to the feeling and observing it very closely, you then start to create stories about how Sunday is slipping through your fingers, and so on. And these thoughts are going to resonate with the negative emotion, negative thoughts, and you go down in a downward spiral. Okay. Now, as with the case of the external stimuli that comes in and makes you react, in the case of internal reaction to your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own emotions, when you don't have enough mindfulness, and when you're not even aware of this process, you don't have a choice. Okay. We could deliberate a lot about this, about whether about the fact that you wish it was different, and you wish you were more positive and whatever. But unless you are aware of the mechanism and start to actively work to counteract this mechanism, it's just a reaction, and you have no choice. You're dragged along, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, so the countermeasure to this, of course, would be emotion wells up within you, and you have enough presence of mind to go, ooh, there's an emotion that's coming up. And sometimes there'll be a first or second thought that kicks in, but you have enough presence, and you go, oh, I notice it. There it is. I notice my mind starting to make reasons for why my life is miserable or whatever, but I know the mechanism now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to become very present in my body. I'm going to observe where that emotion sits in the body, how exactly it feels, pinpoint where it's coming from. Is it moving? Is it pulsating? I'm going to describe it, and maybe I'll even speak it out loud, and I'll give it a name, and I'll give it a degree of intensity in terms of a number, and I'm just going to become super present. Once you start doing that, either for an external stimuli or for an internal emotion, you have essentially started to use negativity, either outside of you or inside of you, to build presence and to build mind power. And this is where real transformation starts to happen. And I can speak for that because having done enough meditation and trying to do this practice on an ongoing basis, after 2 years, I would say that the last 2 or 3 months for me, I've started to see the process develop in real time, and I have started to notice negativity coming up, or a negative thought coming up, and then catching it and turning it around and telling a different story to myself, or just stopping the stories and just being mindful and seeing how powerful it is to see it at work, and how negativity can just be nipped in the butt, and it just stops, and suddenly you just feel love again, and you feel happiness again. And it's quite a revelation when that happens, and it's something that I can't wait for people to experience, because it transforms your life entirely. So the thing to keep in mind at the end of the day is that you have to practice this on an ongoing basis. That is going to be damn hard at first, and in fact at first it's going to be even worse, because you're going to see the negativity coming up, you're going to see the negative thoughts coming up, but you're going to have enough mind power to notice it, but you're not going to have enough mind power to stop it. So So now you're in hell, right? Because not only is the negativity there, but you're super mindful of it, and there's nothing you can do about it, and that's going to be very tough. But that's a period that you need to run through, and one of the things that helps going through that period without thinking like, my God, you know, what did I get myself into? Now things are even worse than they used to be, is to start to realize that negative emotions are just a little chemical cocktail that is going around that feels crappy, but it doesn't mean anything. There's no meaning attached to it. Nobody has ever died from like 30 seconds of a really crappy emotion being in their body if you just observe it really closely. And so you start to work through that and work through that. And what I've noticed as well is that once you have enough mind power, what you'll start to do is not only to stop the negative emotion and the negative thinking, but you can start to actively create positive emotions and actively forgiving, you know, the guy who cut you off in traffic, just by creating a different narrative in your head. And so one that works for me every time is somebody will cut me off, and you know, the normal thought is, okay, that person's an asshole, whether rich, poor, or whatever, and that creates the negativity and the righteous indignation. And what I'll do instead is I'll think to myself, well, you know, how do you know what's going on in this person's life? You know, this could be like the worst day of their life. Maybe they just got fired, or maybe they're in a huge rush to the hospital because their daughter or their wife is giving birth, and it's turned out to be like, you know, there's complications going on. Like, you know, like you have no clue what this person's going through, man. And if you met them as a real person, it could turn out to be like this really cool, caring person that just didn't notice what they did, right? Like they were so worried. And so on. And so seeing them maybe as kind of a victim of a circumstance that they can control, or maybe they're in you know, some kind of moment in their life that is like very tough for them, suddenly brings like all these feelings of compassion towards them, and it makes you feel very warm inside and very caring, and suddenly you start to generate all these good emotions towards an event that would have otherwise been this super negative, you know, minor negative event that you made into a big negative event. And so that's when you really start to transform, is when you start to generate good emotions regardless of whatever's going on outside of you. And maybe you never get to the point where you can stop that initial surge, but you don't need to feed it anymore. And so instead of being a double whammy, it's a single little surge of discomfort that you then turn around through the power of your mind, through being mindful enough, being present enough to see, ooh, okay, somebody did something that I didn't like, but I'm not going to feed that circumstance because I'm responsible for my inner ecosystem. And so I'm going to feed myself with positive thoughts and ways to feel caring towards that person or that event. And so that becomes a transformational tool, because you'll notice that your energy starts to just shoot up and your life starts to change once you become responsible for your own feelings and your own thoughts. So I thought I'd share that with you guys, is just going a lot deeper into, let's say, the mechanics of the egoic mind, inner or outer stimuli coming in, triggering a reaction that when you don't have enough presence just goes out, versus having enough presence to see the stimulus, see the inner reaction, and having enough presence to go, there's a reaction inside of me. I feel a certain emotion. I might be already feeding it with negative thoughts, and I'm going to stop that now, and I'm just going to change my train of thought, observe the emotion, and watch it subside, and then I'll carry on with my life in a very cool way. I see that it's become incredibly dark around me. I have no clue if my face is still visible. Not that there's a lot to be missed if it isn't, but I'll give you guys a last view of, you know, the sunset. I'm certain that the sun is definitely gone by now. So here it is. We're at San Marcos Atitan. That was a video about the mechanics of the egoic mind and going into reaction mode and how to counter that. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys soon. Cheers.